Okay, so in this video, we're going to look at the European Union topic within the UK. It's important that when we look at the European Union, we see the existence of the European Union not as something that was static, but as something that developed over a period of time, starting in the early 1950s after the Second World War. So after the Second World War in 1945, Europe was pretty decimated, and the key thing was to bring those different warring factions together to try and prevent future conflicts. And the idea was that if everyone's economy was meshed together and reliant on each other, then conflict would be so mutually destructive that what you'd end up with is that conflict never occurring in the future, which is good. So they created what they called the European Coal and Steel Community. And the European Coal and Steel Community initially had six founding members: France, West Germany, Italy, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg. So those kind of Western European mainland countries in that particular geographical area. And it regulated the coal and steel industries, which were really important industries at the time. Now, fast forward 6 years, and you ended up with this. That was so successful that in 6 years they signed the Treaty of Rome. And the Treaty of Rome was the first treaty that established the European Economic Community. And it also established the European Atomic Agency Community. And this created a common market and took cooperation beyond those limited areas of coal and steel, and really was that big step towards the kind of European Union that we know today, but was still very much focused on economic issues. So it was very much in the spirit of the European Steel and Coal Community that started in 1951. Now, the Treaty of Rome and the European Economic Community kind of carried on to 1986. And during that time, you had some other countries that wanted to join and were admitted to the EEC. And then in 1986, you had the introduction of the Single European Act. And that Single European Act created an internal market. And by 1992, it introduced measures to improve kind of coordination and decision making. And then in 1992, you had the introduction of the Maastricht Treaty. And the Maastricht Treaty formally established the European Union that we kind of are more aware of today. And it introduced those pillars of the European community: the common and foreign security policy, and justice and home affairs. So it laid the groundwork for, yes, economic integration, as had been happened before, but also importantly, a political element and political integration. So instead of, and the Maastricht Treaty was the first thing that kind of took integration across Europe and made it deeper than just a kind of trading bloc agreement. And then in 2009, you had the signing of the Lisbon Treaty. And the Lisbon Treaty was a crucial reform which enhanced the role of the European Parliament and created the President of the European Council as a permanent thing. And it strengthened the High Representative and for foreign affairs and security policy. So now you had an economic element, a political element, and a foreign and security element. And it streamlined that decision-making process to improve and kind of increase the European Union's global presence. And I think what's really important is this kind of transfer over time. And all that time between 1951 and 2009, the European Union and the members of the European Union was growing from those six founding countries in 1951 to, by the 2009, 27 different countries. So not only was it growing in terms of depth, as in the number of areas that were concerned, but it was also growing in terms of breadth, as in the number of countries that were members of the European Union. And what are the aims of the European Union? Well, the European Union has four stated aims. Firstly, to promote peace. Secondly, to establish a single market, promoting economic, social, and territorial cohesion, and establishing an economic and monetary union. These are things that are rooted, yes, in the origins in terms of promoting peace, and also are all rooted in those economic goals. However, they go beyond those economic goals from the European Economic Community. It was recognised as the EU kind of moved forward with the Maastricht Treaty and the Lisbon Treaty. It was recognised that in order to have kind of economic stability, other areas like social cohesion, territorial cohesion, monetary union needed to come into play. You couldn't just have different countries that were very different to each other having a purely economic agreement. You needed to be able to make sure that there was some kind of like baseline whereby they treated their employees and had environmental regulations that were similar, whereby people were able to freely move between the countries and things like this. And so within the European Union that we know today, there are four key institutions. You've got the European Commission, which is the executive branch of the European Union, which is responsible for kind of proposing legislation, implementing policies, and ensuring compliance. You've got the European Parliament, which is the directly elected body where members of the European Parliament sit, and they have a representative function and represent the interests of their kind of constituents and their geographical areas. You've got the European Council, which is the member state leaders, and so they set the kind of overall political strategy and direction and influence major policy decisions. And then you've got the Council of Europe, which represents national government and legislates alongside with the European Parliament adopting laws. And how do these institutions work together? Well, the European Council meet fairly irregularly and infrequently. However, they set that kind of strategic direction. So they have to all agree and say, well, this is what we want to do. And then between them, Parliament and the Council of the European Union, they are the ones that do the legwork, that work towards that direction. And then the Commission is the organisation that holds countries accountable for meeting the agreements that they've previously set down. And so if we think about the impact that the European Union has had since 1951, well, the European Union has created a single market. Now, within the European Union, you're able to move goods, services, capital, and people freely within that. So if I had some coal that I'd mined in the Netherlands, I would be able to move it to Spain on a train without having to engage in any paperwork. If I have a dairy farm in Ireland, I'd be able to take the milk from my dairy farm in Ireland and sell it in Italy very easily. And that's really important in terms of that equal trading. And this is one of the things that has created difficulty in terms of the Brexit negotiations. Because you're able to move things within the European Union freely, it's a question of how that kind of Northern Ireland border then works. Because then in the EU, the standards are all the same. Because if I was having milk that was produced in Ireland and I was selling that milk in Italy, but the standards for milk in Ireland are very different to that in Italy, then it wouldn't be able to be sold. So you need to have those consistent standards. And so that's really important, as it's created great instability and difficulty in the Brexit process. The European Union has also created peace and stability. It's maintained peace in Europe. Since the founding of the European Union, between EU members, there hasn't been a significant kind of conflict. And that was really kind of one of the critical roles. And that's about sharing values, fostering cooperation, but also, crucially, that economic interdependence. If you are dependent on your neighbouring countries for your economic prosperity, then you aren't incentivized to engage in a conflict with them. And so it promotes diplomatic solutions to regional tensions. And then finally, the European Union has been crucial in setting environmental and social standards. The EU has advanced massively environmental protection and social rights across all member states, promoting sustainability, consumer safety, and workers' rights. Because if you're manufacturing something in Spain, but there are workers in Poland who have a lower minimum wage and have less rights, then you need to make sure that there's a baseline for those rights so that the company isn't incentivized to move to the cheaper country. And so maintaining those workers' rights, those employment rights, and those human rights, as well as environmental sustainability and practices, is really, really important. And these efforts have led to reduced pollution across those countries and massively enhanced social protection within those countries that have become member states, particularly when you look at a number of the kind of former Eastern Bloc countries like Croatia and Hungary that have become later on member states. Arguably, these areas of their kind of national practice have really been enhanced through that membership process. Thank you.